Hello and welcome to the TR Talk Show. I'm your host, Hawk Robinson, and this is episode 3 of the Therapeutic Recreation / Recreation Therapy Talk Show, where we discuss all things related to recreation therapy, music therapy, neuroscience, and research psychology, and various adjuncts and modalities, techniques, theories, assessment tools, some of the political issues going on with the TR industry, etc., lobbying challenges, certification, licensing, all of that. And once again, just to let you know, we are looking for co-hosts and guests to be on this show. We had hoped to have Danielle Whitworth on here today, but she has been under the weather. She and John Welker had both gone with me to this year's American Therapeutic Recreation Association conference in Reno, Nevada. And we each networked and met with various people, had some wonderful experiences, attended some great workshops and presentations. And we talked a little bit about that from John's perspective last week. He was here last week, but Danielle hasn't quite recovered, so we're hoping maybe next week we'll have her on the show to cover her side of the experience. We also had a participant yesterday over at RPG Research, the 501c3 nonprofit research and human services organization studying the effects of all music and role-playing game formats and their potential to help improve lives. A volunteer signed up there who was at ATRA and is joining as a volunteer over there. And he gave some of his experience of the ATRA experience as a new student working towards the requirements for the CTRS, the Certified Therapeutic Recreation Specialist certification. The presentation, we did an all-day pre-conference workshop from 8:30 a.m. to 5 p.m. on bringing role-playing games, first of all, the awareness, history, myths, research, evidence-based practice and evidence-based information and evidence and practice information, and the steps towards bringing role-playing games into a recreation therapist's practice. And had fair attendance with that and some great interaction, and it went well. And then for the remaining days of the conference, we were meeting with people, conferencing. We did the new the mentorship speed rounds, etc. So we were glad to be able to have that opportunity there. We were down there with the wheelchair-accessible RPG trailer and RPG bus. These are mobile facilities to provide therapeutic recreation activities, music activities, role-playing game activities, etc., in a comfortable, controlled environment. They're both prototypes of more idealized versions, but they have worked. We've used them for years to great effect across the country. We've been driving them around the country with them. This latest tour, we covered 5 states. Last year, we covered 8 states. Over the last 2 years, we've covered around 20 states with these mobile facilities, in addition to our local Northwest practice and such. So again, looking for guests and co-hosts, particularly people with CTRSs. We spoke with a number of individuals from ATRA who seemed to be interested. We just need to follow up with the conversations for getting them scheduled on here. And I do hope to have guests on here fairly frequently, at least one guest a show as we get them queued up. We're only on episode 3 here. It takes a little bit to get momentum going. But we're getting there. Word is spreading quite a bit more rapidly than I expected. People are excited about this show existing. As I had felt myself, it fills a gap that's surprisingly there with the lack of a talk show to cover these topics. And this conference was yet another indicator as to how important I think this show will be for our profession. Again, I had hoped that Danielle would be here to cover her ATRA experiences. I'll give a little bit of a summary of mine and John's. And then we're going to talk a little bit about assessment tools and some of my pet peeves about what's happening, what happens in the TR industry, which I think others I know, want to try to improve and change. And we're going to do it in the context of a lot of stuff we're doing over at RPG Research. Now, normally a TR Talk Show, we don't get into a whole lot of the role-playing game stuff other than just these oblique mentions. And again, we welcome other guests and hosts to talk about other topics. But this ties into the topic of assessment and assessment tools, validity, reliability, interrater reliability, etc. So we'll get to that in a little bit. So first, we'll talk a little bit more about the ATRA experience. Some of it may be a little bit of a repeat of last week's show, but I think there's other tidbits that have come up in discussion that you might have missed. If you haven't caught the previous show, I do need to add the links to it, because until we get to 1,000 views on our channel, we can't have our own custom YouTube URL. So, for example, youtube.com/TR Talk Show. We can't do that till we get to about 1,000 views. So please do spread the word, watch the videos as best you can. But TR Talk Show for now is where I will post the links to each of the videos. I just realized I didn't do that for the last episode, so I need to take care of that. Right after the show, I'll get all 3 of the episodes linked from the website. Also want to let you know about an upcoming workshop. So for those of you who couldn't attend the ATRA conference, where you could get the CEUs, first of all, we did do 3 of the 4 sessions as webinars. Those will be available through the ATRA online website in a couple of months, they said, and those will be accredited for CEUs as well. And they're the first 3 of the 4 sessions. Session 1 was the history, myths, and research about role-playing games. Session 2 was using role-playing games across the developmental life cycle, from toddlers through senior adults. Then session 3 was the beginning of covering a wide range of populations: autism spectrum, ADHD, at-risk populations, incarcerated populations, brain injury, deaf, visually impaired, muscular dystrophy, cerebral palsy, a whole wide range of populations. And that's actually more of a 2-parter, so we can only cover a portion of them in that session 3. And then session 4, we had covered more of the populations and then professional issues, and we do not yet have a webinar for that, but it sounds like they want us to do some more. So we will hopefully have that for you in the future, and that's a way for you to get some of your CEUs. Now, those they do charge for, because of the CEUs. They have to pay for them and some of the editing they're doing. And again, there'll be a couple months, and we don't have control of those. Once we record them, they take care of it from there. But also we have coming up, because we have a lot of people asking for more training for those who couldn't attend. Now, we're not able to give CEUs yet on our end. We would love to do that, but we're not quite where we can do that. But we do have a ton of training. We have nearly 100 courses on bringing these kinds of programs, between music programs and like drum circles and collaborative music programs, as well as all sorts of role-playing games, tabletop, live-action, electronic. So we have a workshop. We're planning to do these workshops quarterly, and so we have one scheduled tentatively at this point, depending upon attendance, and I haven't quite announced it yet. I'll be announcing it later tonight on the rpgtherapy.com website in the news section. On December 18th, it's an all-day workshop from 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. There will be a lunch break and a dinner break. We might move that a little later to 7 or 8 p.m. because of the breaks. We're still nailing down that exact schedule. It's around $500 without lunch provided, so you'll get a break, and there's places to eat nearby, and you can just go and get the food. Or for those who want it catered, it'll be a little bit more. We still have to work out the pricing. It'll be probably about $50, $100 more or something like that. Just depends on what the local catering will be. And if anybody wants it, right? It might be everybody just decides to go take the break and go get food, and that's fine. For those who want to stay around and talk further during the lunch, then that's a good reason to attend the catered version. But that's about the price point. It's about $500 for an all-day workshop. It covers the same material we covered at ATRA with a little more depth, because we've got a little bit more time to work with the timeline that we've set up. So a few more sessions, a little less rushed than we had to do with the ATRA conference, but it will not have the CEUs at this point. I'm not sure if there's a process, and I'd love for anybody to let us know, that we can make our workshops accredited. That's something we'll have to talk to the ATRA folks about. I suspect at this point it can't be, and you'll only be able to do that through the ATRA webinars or the conferences when we run those. But it will give you the training you need to get started on the pathway towards bringing role-playing games and music programs into your therapeutic recreation practice. And it's a little bit broader. It's not TR only. It's meant for all therapists and caretakers that want to bring those kinds of programs into their practice. So that's coming up December 18th, and if you're interested, it'll be here in Spokane, Washington. We're also looking at doing web-based versions for those who can't make it to the state. We'll probably do those staggered, where we have quarterly the in-person workshop, and then we'll have one that is remote. So the next quarter would be a remote one, then in person, then remote. The remote ones, it's harder to do the hands-on programs. So we'll try to be as creative as possible, but they won't be as much hands-on as the in-person workshops will be. And so it would behoove you to do that. And the price point will probably be about the same because it still takes about the same time and such. The workshops in person are at our offices, so it doesn't cost us anything extra to do them there. So, letting you know about that. So getting that aside, talking about ATRA, for those of you who couldn't attend, and I've been emailed by many who really wished they could have and were unable to do so. By the way, if you're watching the stream live, remember in YouTube, you can post, if you go to where you're seeing this video, you can comment and chat real time so I can answer any questions you might have real time. In fact, give me a moment here. This is why I need to have a crew to tweet this out so that people will actually, I don't know if I'll have to do it through another computer. We've got to get this streamlined. We've got everything running smoothly for RPG research in the studio, but it's new to running RPG therapeutics, and we don't have everything quite set up yet here. So give me a moment while this is the joys of live without a crew to run it. Okay, so here's my go live. So anyway, we were there. We arrived that Friday and set up with the trailer and the bus. And that's interesting. Episode 1 still showing things happening. Then at the Pepper Mill in Reno. And Saturday did the all-day workshop. Then Sunday attended many things, Monday many things, and then Tuesday I had to leave early with the bus and the trailer. Actually, Monday night, but John and Danielle remained behind to attend and meet with people. During Sunday, Monday, lots of people came out to the bus and the trailer, got to try out virtual reality and augmented reality equipment, got to try out the computer-based games. They were able to try out the live action role-playing, and then mostly the people were interested in the tabletop and then the electronic side. And let's see here. Doesn't like my browser, of course. So, and that was great. We even had one attendee who was fairly negative about role-playing games, had bought into most of the negativity about it, and said so up front. But by the end, was participating in a role-playing game with Doctor Who in the bus, and said that she believes she's going to be able to use that for a better connection with her daughter. So her daughter apparently is into geeky things and such, is how she phrased it, and felt that would give a better connection. All right. Let me get to my actual channel here. So I'm going to be tweeting about this. So my tweet is twitter.com RPG Therapeutics. There's also RPG Therapy and RPG Therapist. Those are slightly different perspectives, but I will be trying to spread the word on all of them. So if you follow on there, you'll be able to get announcements. We'll try to get better about spreading the word in advance so that but just remember, Tuesdays, 1 p.m. to 2 p.m. is when we will be doing this show generally. Now, we had to skip while we were at the conference, and so I wanted to do some there at the conference, but everybody's schedules just didn't work out. So when we attend future conferences, we'll see if we can arrange with the coordinators to have a set time in advance for doing a live show and potentially having an audience and everything. We've done that with other organizations and other conferences, so hopefully we can do that with future ATRA and local regional ones so that we do some live streaming from the convention. Let's see. Let's see. Sorry about having to do this on the air. I should have thought of this before, but we're still getting in the groove here. All right. And so that's at least on Twitter, and I have to get it onto Facebook. Those are the two main areas. We've had people from Canada and throughout North America interested in what we're doing here. And so it's great that people really want to see more of this. And we're trying to address this accordingly. We've got a number of people who are asking about how to do training affordably. And you can go join over at the nonprofit RPG Research as a volunteer and get free training, you need to make sure you give back to the community. You don't just take. And it's usually about a year-long commitment of about 3 hours a week, and you'll get a lot of training on a lot of the same topics. It's a more dynamic environment. The stuff we do tends to be more polished, obviously. But that is a place where people can do that. Let's see. So met with President of ATRA, met with the person doing the webinars, met with the president of Idle Arbor, who does a lot of the publications. He has interest in us doing some books. And we were talking about assessment tools, and I'm waiting for it to arrive. They have a green book. So there's the red book, and I'm still unpacking everything, so I don't have it handy right now. But the red book that has all those wonderful assessment tools with their validity and reliability for some of them listed, some with some pretty good data, and some with others are like, yeah, well, that's better than nothing, and then some that really don't have any validity or reliability information. And we've gone through over the years, about a decade and a half in practice, and really highlighted the ones that had good research versus the ones that are weak and none. And we're shocked as we run into other recreational therapists and other professionals in general to see how few use well-supported, evidence-supported, empirical data about the efficacy of the tools that they're using, right? The different assessment tools, whether they're for baselines or progress or exit, etc. It's a little disturbing. A lot of them are in-house tools. And, as a profession, we really want to be taken more seriously. And part of that is using effective tools. One of the areas that over in RPG Research we're working on trying to address, because we've run through our own internal peer review, is the activity assessment examples. So in the red book, in the cookbook, and several of the bluer books from other people from Idle Arbor and elsewhere, they have, and this is taught in the schools, they're used as the examples, and we have run into lots of recreational therapists who literally just take from the textbook and create that as their own activity assessment form. But there is no validity or reliability there, and I've asked around. I've been trying to find a published activity analysis form that has undergone that level of scrutiny, and so far nobody's been able to point me to anything that really is. There's lots of people saying, "Oh, we have our own internal." Has it been through any peer review? No, it has not. So we've done some internal peer review of these different ones that are in the textbooks, and what we found is the binary choices, where it's a checkbox, yes or no, things like that, those tend to hold up pretty well. They seem to be, for the most part, there's always a phrasing issue, but for the most part, they hold up on validity, on reliability, and interrater reliability. And I'm going to focus a little bit more right now on the interrater reliability issue, because for those of you who are in private practice or working in a facility where you're the only therapist doing the work, that might be less of an issue. It's still a concern, but it reduces one particular major confound to worry about, and that is interpretation of what the assessment tool means and what the results mean between different practitioners. And that's the interrater reliability issue. So, for example, I've used for years my own versions of an activity analysis tool, and my clients come in with existing medical data about their diagnoses and their function, etc. I do some additional functional assessments, and so in a spreadsheet, I get where their strengths and weaknesses are. We establish what their goals are. We set a program plan, and in figuring out which are the best activities from the large tool belt of activities available, whether it's music, role-playing games, outdoor activities, sports, table, crafts, all the wonderful tool belts that we as rec therapists develop over the years. See what is going to be the best match, right? Which has the highest scoring from the activity analysis, addressing the needs of this client and seeing where they mesh the best to be the most effective tool in the shortest amount of time, whether we're talking about insurance or self-pay or whatever is the situation. And when it was only me, before I had employees and such, that seemed to work pretty well. There's a combination of experience and intuition, which is not good science, but Some professionals just intuit better than others. And I would get good results. And because I do baseline measurements of my clients when they come in, they must complete assessments. They must go through baselines if they haven't already been through baselines through other practitioners with tests that I recognize and that I think that there's quality there. Like if it's just a general practitioner and we're dealing with an ADHD diagnosis, I often will still refer the client to another location like neuroeducation to do the diagnosis first. Especially if I do a functional assessment and they're not showing up, it's not fitting the pattern of ADHD, I'm more likely to refer them to a facility that I know is very good at accurate diagnoses and assessment of all kinds of learning disabilities, ADHD, autism spectrum, whole wide range, and then I'll get back from them this detailed report, their IQ, all their areas and different, their WAEAs results, all of this. And now I can really put together a more effective program plan to meet their goals as quickly as possible. Now, neuroeducation for that type of assessment, last I saw, was about $2,000, spread out over several sessions, depending upon their age and what's being assessed. That's not cheap. Insurance doesn't always pay for it. It always depends. So you need the GP to help with that referral process, etc. But unfortunately, too many times GPs have diagnosed ADHD by just questioning the client and or parents, guardians, and or schools, and not doing a more formal assessment at all, and then giving them an ADHD diagnosis and wanting to do medication, etc. And the client comes because they're not having luck with the medication and hoping they can find another way to address the issues. That's just one of many, many examples. So when it was just me, when it was just my practice, my assessment tool that was homemade worked pretty well for the most part. It seemed to be fairly consistent. It was usually giving me the right results, etc. Where it really broke down is once I got employees. So as I was training employees, and then now let's switch over to RPG research, where we do research and we study and test these things. We've got over 80 volunteers across 5 continents. 4 plus continents, 4 and 5 varies, but we have about a dozen researchers ranging from bachelor's to PhDs to postdoctorate, etc. And we have gone through some of these assessment tools through an internal peer review. And for example, out of the cookbook and out of the blue books and such, as I said, the binary questions seem to hold up well. The phrasing people seem to interpret the same way, and we get pretty consistent responses when I say, for a drum circle activity, is this X, is this Y, etc. Now, if you want to see our detailed, like we went through question by question and talked about where it broke down and where it held up, that's over at RPG Research. So you can go to youtube.com/RPG Research, and you'll find section there. You have to search. YouTube makes it a little difficult. Or you can go to their Patreon site at patreon.com/RPG Research and join as a patron there, and you get access a month early or more earlier. But there are entire sessions of just going through the assessment tools line by line and seeing what held up and what broke down in people's interpretations. And what it breaks down is where we have the variant scales. So some people like to call them Likert scales, but they're not quite. They're more graduated scales, etc. Some are more Likert, but those are really suffer when the questions are not phrased correctly, or understanding what the scale is. What is simple versus complex? What is a lot of coordination versus very little coordination? So we had people with the drum circles without understanding what simple or complex was, putting a 4 or a 5 in high complexity for playing the drum versus a 1 or a 2. My interpretation of it is it's a 1 or a 2 to play a drum at the minimum. We're talking the minimum basic level to participate. Even somebody with cerebral palsy, muscular dystrophy, brain injuries can, unless it's very specific injuries, can get at least some kind of beat. If it's on the if you've got a 4 count and it's on 1, 2, 3, 4, nothing complicated, or even just the initial downbeat, just 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. We have as young as 2 and 3-year-old participants in those drum circles. So in my experience, which tends to be a lot more than my current employees and such. So I'm looking for others who have more. I always want to hire people who are better if possible. That is not a lot of coordination to play at the minimum level to participate in a circle. Now, solo, that's a different story. You need to do a lot more when you're solo. But when you're doing it in a circle, everybody can be at their different levels, and that works fine. However, both with my employees and then on the research side, it was all over the place as far as what people interpreted for complexity. And the only way to fix that was to set some examples of what is simple, what is complex, and or change the phrasing and or change the scale. And we've been playing around with different ways of doing that. And so the problem is most of these, and then you look at the newer assessments from the blue books, they don't even use a scale. They just use blank lines to fill in the slots. And that is all over the place. So what happens with these assessment tools is interrater reliability completely falls apart. And that is dangerous for your client. Some of these activities in themselves may not be harmful in any way, but as far as wanting to make progress and what's most beneficial to them versus a complete waste of their time or completely going to alienate them, maybe increase their frustration level too high, this is a real problem, not having some consistency. And I'm seeing it across CTRSs, not just laypersons and people from other professions. It gets worse and worse the further you get, which is not surprising. You want to start with the core profession, and then you go out from there like, okay, so if all the CTRSs who are of a generation and of a training pretty much answer the same, that's a certain level of interrater reliability. That's good. We want to have that as a minimum. Then we go out to maybe a different generation and different level of CTRS training experience, and we expect that it goes from like 0.8 correlation, coefficient to maybe a 0.7 or something. But we're still okay. We're not as good as we want to be. Our goal is to try to have everything 0.8 or higher. Is our standard generally. We will allow the 0.6, 0.7 range if there's no other choice. We really don't like to use anything lower than a 0.6. Or we shore up the weaker parts of, like, if it's 0.8, 0.9 in most areas, but it's got one area that's a 0.4 or 0.6 or something, then we might use an additional assessment tool for that area to shore up that section. We've seen that with like the LRI and the LIM and things like that. So the interrater reliability of all of the assessment tools that are out there in the books that are being taught to all the students, both from previous generation and the latest generation, have not held up as we've done internal peer review and had different people will say, here's an activity, go through, fill it out, and then we'll discuss it after. Completely breaks down on either the blank spaces or the scales. It is you might as well flip a coin. In fact, it's so bad. So we've been undertaking an active project, and it's spanning months already, and it's probably going to take years. But we are trying very hard to put together an activity analysis tool that gets to a 0.8 or better for all CTRSs, of multiple generations, that it's a 0.8 or better for CTRSs. And that for related and adjunct care professionals, so physical therapy, music therapists, occupational therapists, etc., who are fairly close to that in the training, that they're at least a 0.6 or better. And then as we get out farther from the circle of CTRS, that we're still like a 0.4 or better for other practitioners, etc. That's our goal with this assessment tool. If we can get to that level, we consider that a successful tool, far better than what's there, which at this point is basically, other than the binary choices, is completely random. There is no, it's bad. And like I say, I've gone through the cookbook, I've gone through the newer books, and they do not hold up on the interrater reliability at all. They're not even a 0.2. So this is very concerning, because as I posted on the ATRA Oklahoma State EDU list about this months ago, and a number of people emailed me privately and such, but they said, yeah, they're using these as guides for their tools, and that's very, very concerning, because this is a foundational component of what we do as recreational therapists is our activity analysis. Are we using the right activities to meet the specific needs of a specific client or group? So just, I would love to hear people's feedback. If you know of other resources, it's only been about I think 4 or 6 months that I've been really hammering on this and asking around. So it's certainly in its infancy. I keep hoping that somebody out there can point me to something that has undergone rigorous testing and does hold up at a 0.8 or better. Because I don't want to reinvent the wheel. Any chance to avoid reinventing the wheel, so much the better. But at the moment, we haven't been able to find that. Now, there's an adjunct to that, which is more related to the role-playing game side, where we want our activity analysis tool to include being able to determine which role-playing game and which role-playing game format to use for the different populations. So for those of you who don't know about role-playing games, tabletop's the one most people are aware of, with Dungeons & Dragons at the table with rolling dice. Then you have live action, which is the type where you see people with foam swords, or they just dress up in costume, or they don't even do that, but they're moving around and acting in some way as part of the role play. And then you've got the electronic type, audio role-playing games, computer-based role-playing games, things like that, World of Warcraft, etc. And then you get all these other hybrids, which are crossovers between all of these, and card games and board games and live action, electronic, etc. Those are the 4 major formats. And in the activity analysis, we want to make sure that the information that's given to us includes, because role-playing gaming is a very distinct modality that most people do not know and has some isms about it, that none of the activity analysis forms include questions that help us determine what would be the best system to use, because there's different levels of complexity of systems, different styles of play. Some are more action-oriented, some are more social-oriented, some are more exploration, some are more puzzle-solving, some are a nice mix. And different clients are going to have different play style preferences. That's another assessment tool we're working. We've aggregated all the existing play style assessment tools out there, and we're trying to get it down to a condensed one, and so that we can actually determine what kind of play. So you have people who are explorers, you have people who are problem solvers, you have people who are socializers, etc. And we're trying to make sure we have that better in our, because right now our current one as an aggregate of all the others is incredibly long. We have to have people do it in multiple sessions so they don't have too much cognitive fatigue. So most rec therapists should be using some sort of activity analysis form in their practice, whether a private practice or at a facility. If your facility's not doing that, like they didn't at some point look at an activity and run it through an activity analysis, you need to do that. And the question is, what is the tool you're using? I would love to see it if you're allowed to. By the way, you can email me if you want to be on the show, comment, whatever, rpgtherapeutics@gmail.com. I'm working on one for the TR Talk Show specifically, but we're still moving servers. So for now, just use rpgtherapeutics@gmail.com. And tell me about your experiences with activity assessment tools. And we're not talking task analysis, yes. We're talking about activity analysis, right? Task analysis comes later in the process. That's really walking through every step. And I use that all the time for training people and certification, all of that. But we're talking at the higher level, the activity analysis, that foundational aspect upon which our practice is built. The tools I've seen so far that are all in the textbooks, etc., are inherently terribly flawed. And I'm really hoping there's something better out there. So those of you who have far more experience than I've been doing this about 15 years in TR, and then other things, over the decades in nursing and rehabilitation therapy and computer science and neuroscience and psychology other years. But been in TR over 15 years. And so there's lots of you out there who have far more experience than I do in TR. And would really love to know if you have what tool you use, where it was, if you guys built it yourselves, if you found it published somewhere, and was it peer reviewed at some point? Did it undergo tests for validity, reliability, interrater, all the different facets, and what were the ratings for those? If it didn't, have you tried to do it internally at least to have some sort of internal idea of how useful it is? If you didn't do that, why are you using this tool? Is it just like everybody else has been, well, there's nothing else out there, got to make do with what there is. But if you're aware of one that has held up, please tell me. We would much rather use something that exists than have to start from scratch. But at the moment, we're assuming, until somebody tells us otherwise, we've searched and searched and searched the databases and the websites. We posted on the ATRA list. I asked all sorts of people at the ATRA conference, and nobody could give me an answer. Every tool they mentioned, is already in this list. hopefully there's other tools that you know that you can point me to, and we can take a look at it and see if it solves this problem. So, but I do know about all these therapists I talk to are using the ones that are based out of these books that you're not even really supposed to, right? They're teaching tools. They're not really what you're supposed to use in your practice, but a lot of people seem to be using it in their practice and they don't hold up. What have your experiences been with that? Did you even consider this? Were you aware of these concerns? How much, when you went through your CTRS training, how much, but from my experience, the research side and understanding research side in the CTRS is pretty darn light, compared to other professions like research psychology, neuroscience, computer science, etc. We had a lot of research experience and a lot of the tools. So definitely want to find out what the best tools are out there for this profession. And if it doesn't exist, wow, that would explain a lot of the grief we get from other professions who have more robust tools. So I hope that I hope it's out there. Would really love to know. Again, I posted on the ATRA list some months ago. Nobody had a strong response saying, yes, this is a great tool. Here's what we recommend. Not one. And talking to all these people, that is concerning. This is, again, a fundamental concern to our profession. So would really appreciate your feedback on that. Let's see how we're doing on time here. Okay, we've got a little bit more on there. Still trying to get the word out to people. And again, if you missed the live broadcast, the recording, I'll have the link right after the show added to the trtalkshow.com thing. In fact, let me update that here. If you missed the live broadcast, check the TR Talk Show website for a link to the recorded episodes. All right, trtalkshow.com. All right. And we're getting somewhere, getting it to the different groups. And again, would love to have folks on here. I hope, talking to the president of Idle Arbor and such, that maybe he'll be willing to come in. He seemed very fascinated by our efforts to address these assessment issues. I was very excited that he was there. I have ordered the Green Book, which is about building these assessment tools and the processes they have been used. But I went through and explained the process that we've used, and he seemed very happy with the approach we've been taking in trying to address this. So, so that was encouraging from him, who created the Red Book and everything, right? They've got a lot of experience doing this in TR, and so that was definitely encouraging. And as I said, the Green Book should be arriving in a few days. They don't really have really expedited shipping, but it'll be here soon, and we will go over it over the RPG research side, and we'll also talk about it a little bit here on the TR Talk Show. As I said, I'm still kind of unpacking from the tour, so a lot of my TR books aren't. They're still in the trailer and the bus. I got a few on the things are a mess right now, but as I get them back on the shelf here, I'll be able to pull them and go over them. And we will literally on this talk show, from time to time, go right out of the textbooks and discuss some of these topics with the specific examples. We'll talk about some of the assessment tools that we've been very happy with, that we've seen have held up well under peer review. They already had good peer review data. We did some more peer review on our end, and they did continue to hold up nicely with some populations that weren't tested in that particular sample. We found that they still held up or didn't, but for the most part, when they had a good scoring in the Idle Arbor book, Red Book, then it usually translated well into practice. So that's encouraging that their methodologies, have held up fairly well in practice. Let's see, what was another topic that somebody wanted to make sure we try to address? So that's really focusing on the assessment. Oh, the thread going around, that was one of the things that we were going to discuss threads. I think we did it last week, talking about the APIE debate, some of the upset about ATRA unilaterally changing compared to what's in the because they're following the CART stuff. But there's some upset on the list about using APIE versus APIE, and I have often said APIE-R. Yes, APIE is the core of the process. The D and R are just reminders, because you see a lot of people who don't do it, to document and to redo, to reevaluate, to reassess, to replan, to reimplement, to reevaluate. And so when we're training folks, we do APIE DR, APIE R. APIE is the process. D and R are reminders that you should be doing that through every step of the process. But there's some upset because they've been listening to straight APIE, and that's creating some confusion for people, and I can understand that argument. And so I'm rejiggering some of our training to reflect that more accurately, where it'll say APIE and then in parentheses D/R, and then always make sure we're illustrating that the APIE part's the process, but document. I can't tell you how many rec therapists we run into. We ask to see the documentation. They're not following any of, whether it's antiquated SOAP or any of the other newer formats. It's a little disturbing. Whether they're younger, it's kind of interesting. The very new ones will do the documentation, but it's not always the most useful documentation. They tend to document the wrong things sometimes. And then the really experienced ones have gotten, I don't know, a little lazy, burned out, what have you. They're like, oh, I've got that. I already, and they'll use really cryptic notes sometimes. And so it's kind of interesting. It's kind of the middle folk of experience seem to do a better job on the documentation, depending on the facility, right? There's a culture in different facilities about documentation, and some are better about that than others. Because I come from the computer science, neuroscience, research psychology background as well, nursing, and I did information security and physical security for a lot of years, where the logs will literally save you from jail and liability and lawsuits. So, for example, I used to do security for distressed properties. So this landowner guy who he was a contractor, and he bought a duplex or a house, and then he flipped it, then he did a duplex, and he flipped it, then he did a quad, and he flipped it. And by the time I met him, he was in his 40s, he's a multimillionaire from doing this kind of process. And he would buy now entire apartment complexes that were called distressed properties. This meant that they were in rough shape there, and they were overrun with a lot of problematic tenants. And that meant they were cheap to buy. And he got really good at judging which ones had good bones and could be improved for a minimal amount, and those that would be a money pit. And so I was living in a place that he had already fixed up and such, and I was doing security, and then I was doing maintenance. And then he started to hire me to the other properties because then he'd turn out and flip them, sell them for a neat profit, and move on. And then sometimes the people who took over did a good job keeping it going, and others let it descend. He moved on. So he, as this relationship developed over the years, would buy a distressed property, move me into an apartment there, and it would be roach infested and nasty, terrible neighborhood. And there would be drug dealers and prostitutes and gangbangers. And it was just, oh my goodness, it was a zoo. And I'd have to do security day and night, wouldn't get a lot of sleep for about the first 6 months. And I would log everything. Every time they went in and out of a door after 10 o'clock at night. So monitoring traffic, anybody peeling out in the parking lot, every little thing that we could aggregate into the logs, because it would create an overall narrative over time about, if you will, the health of that particular building, that particular floor, and that particular apartment. You could drill down through the logs, and it was just literally just a little flip thing that I'd fill in the notes and such, and then aggregate those. And by the end of 6 months, I typically evicted 40 to 60% of the population as drug dealers, prostitutes, gangbangers, etc., because it would be very dangerous. And this made me unpopular. My apartment would get shot up. I'd have to move to another apartment. Oh, man, this is when I was single and didn't have kids, and it was a job. And so, and then it would get better, right? Once the troublemakers were out, then he'd fix the place up. He'd replace all the furnaces and all the locks so they're all in a single key system, all this, and really make it a nice place. He was not a slumlord. He really took slums and turned them into nice places. And he wouldn't like crank up the rent. He'd bring it up a little bit to a little bit more market, but he would not jack up the rent really high and drive out those that were there. I never saw anybody leave because of the rent increases. They were so happy to have the place improve and still be close to the same. And he generally grandfathered people. It'd be the new people that he might charge a higher rent for. That's how he would transition it. The old people, their rent stayed the same generally. So, and they tend to be very multicultural. There are people from Vietnam and Colombia and just all over the world. And then often he had a Section 8 building with a lot of people. Back then it was MR, now DDI and such with developmental disabilities, etc. Which, after the place was cleaned up, that tended to be the place that I got more calls as security and maintenance. Because they put a metal cup in the microwave and tried to burn their apartment down, things like that by accident. So it still kept things a little interesting, but it was a lot safer. So anyway, the logging, because a lot of these people, like the drug dealers and such, some of them were making a lot of money. And they had traffic going in and out constantly. It was 24/7, people going in and out, knocking on the door, coming in and out of the parking lot, etc. So they're pretty easy to identify and deal with pretty quickly. But they would sometimes fight it. Some of them didn't care. They just moved to the next place where they wouldn't get harassed. Others would try to fight it. And we would have to go to court. And the logs, we never lost a single court contest because of those logs. And that was why he kept hiring me, because he had other security guards who weren't as good at the logging, and they would lose some of the battles sometimes. And we never lost one because of logging. So let's bring that back to TR and liability as well as safety. So, of course, the first safety thing, now this is more for the students than the experienced TR folks. You guys all know this part. But let's have this conversation, and I welcome your comments. And again, if you think what I'm saying is wrong, I'm misspeaking, please, let's have a productive, constructive conversation about where you think I'm going amiss. I only have about 15 years of TR experience, and then I've got some additional years in nursing and rehabilitation therapy, and research, and some of these other fields. But in TR, there are plenty of you who have far more experience, and even those who are younger who just found other experiences. Let's have a conversation. That's what this whole show is about. I'm trying to start the momentum here with this monologue, but I don't want it to stay a monologue. I want it to be a multiple person dialogue where we're talking about these important topics. So, let's see, any other, okay, we're going to start being fun. Okay, I'm still kind of spreading the word here while in the last few minutes of the show. So with the documenting and the logging and such, big liability protection. If and it could be a two-edged sword. If you document something that you did wrong, well, then that's evidence to be used against you, but it's better than trying to hide it. And especially if you're dealing with where your clients have real health issues, you're in a rehab center and such, where there's significant health issues to worry about, and people could, brain injury department and such, people can die if you don't document properly. Now, those facilities typically have pretty good software and policies to enforce it, but even those, I've seen some of the rec therapists be a bit lax. One of the challenges is that they often will see several clients in a row, before they then stop and document. And they don't do any of the logging as they go, even to just a little pencil and paper notebook or something, so that they can keep their notes straight. And I would be watching over their shoulder, and what do you know? They sometimes conflated the last 3 patients they saw in their logs. They either went, I can't remember, was that patient 1 or patient 3? I can't remember. I think it's this one. Or they would start writing down, wait a minute, that was patient number 2. That wasn't patient 1. And this could have real serious effects. It may not be a medication thing, but the activity. So let's say they put them at level, let's say on a scale of 1 to 10, you're trying to get them to at least a 5. and you put them at only 2, but really they were at a 4, and they're getting near the end of their term there in the facility or the program, whatever it is. Now it looks like they went backwards from the last session. Maybe you're handing off to different rec therapists. Maybe you're gone next week because of vacation or illness. Somebody else has to handle it and go, whoa, wait a minute, they were going 2, 3, 4, now they're back to 2. What happened? And the clients can say, I thought I was making progress. I thought I was doing well. I don't know why it was only a 2. It's just so critical. And I was a little disturbed at how many facilities I saw rec therapists be kind of blasé about the documentation. And this is in every profession. You see this everywhere. There are people who are more on top of that than others. So, one of the things I've always liked to use is keep something a little handy. I mean, nowadays it's cell phones, but the problem is it often looks like you're texting and stuff, right? Employers and others might be a little concerned about that. So I've fallen back to the old-fashioned flip notebook with a pencil to keep track of my quick notes. If I'm not going to be able to go straight to, if I've got back-to-back clients and I'm not going to be able to do my computer entry into the software right away, I will do, and I don't like having to write. I've got dysgraphia and everything. It's painful to write, but it's much better to do that because human memory is so fallible to interference patterns. It's really critical, especially as we get busy and juggling all these things. We really need to do that for our patient's safety. And then it's much easier to jog the memory, go, okay, that was this client. Okay, let me put this in correctly, etc. And I've, in some other trainees and such that have helped them do that, they've commented on how much it's improved. Not just the consistency of them documenting, but the accuracy that because when they start to get fuzzy about who was who, they might err on the side of just leaving it out because they weren't sure. And that doesn't serve the client or the profession well either. So anyway, these are some of the topics. We're talking assessment. We're talking about implementation here, doing the programs, monitoring how they're doing, and keeping track of the information on how they're experiencing that. Another time we'll talk about the planning phase. When we talk about the activity analysis, that's part of the planning phase, but we've got all that documentation. And then after you do it, right, we go through the assessment, go through the planning, we go through the implementation. We got to evaluate how they did, do the exit plan, their transitions, how we did as facilitators, etc. Now we got to go back through and redocument each step. We need to go through and reevaluate reappraise how our assessment tools are. I just talked about how our activity analysis tools in the industry, as far as I can find, are really lacking. Well, now we know that. How do we go back through and reevaluate that, what tools we're using and how we're using them to improve that? And then we have to then go through and see how that changes our plans. And then we have to see how that's going to change our actual implementations with those clients. And then we've got to see how that with the exit evaluations and such, and how you have to train people and you have to evaluate how they did in their training. And so it's all iterative. Coming from computer software development of it's 40 years now. I've been involved with software development on and off and for 40 years. It is an iterative process. In computer tech, I really ride hard on the developers to actually document, and they're terrible about it. They might comment their code. Unfortunately, the more experienced ones get really lazy about it and say, it's in the code, just read the code. No. Minimum is commenting the code, but that is not documentation. Exporting it with Java docs or Python docs, something like that, is not proper documentation, unless you write really good comments. And there are some developers who do. But you need to comment and write the documentation explaining what you're doing, how things should work, why they're working, not working with the API, etc., with that class call, that method, etc. Same thing with what we do in TR practice. It's great to have our little short notes. We need them to jog our memory. Our software may limit what we can do. Our time may limit. But have those short notes, and then find a way to allocate the time at the end of the day, if you have to go through those short notes and turn them into a more comprehensive narrative. The narrative, as long as it's written properly, reduces some of the confusion, right? Because sometimes we fall into abbreviations, and the industry standards of abbreviations have changed over the decades, so that gets confusing. And do everybody a favor, the client especially, but the facility. And this is a liability thing, right? If we don't document, it opens us up to liability so much more. than if we do. We can point to go, well, this documentation said this, this, and this. And then also creates an audit trail. We can figure out who is screwing up, and so maybe those people don't want to document because it does make them accountable. But that's critical that we do that for our profession, don't you think? So I hope this has been useful for bringing up some topics that you may or may not have had time to stop and think about since you were in school. Or maybe you are in school right now and weren't aware of some of these professional issues. I hope it is a seed for conversation with your peers, with your professors, with your facilitators, with your trainees, your interns. And I really hope you will contact me so we can have further conversations about this. Feel free to just post on the YouTube comments, of course. I'll get notified and be able to respond. Or email rpgtherapeutics@gmail.com. And again, we're looking for co-hosts, CTRS co-hosts, and special guests. I'd like to have a special guest every episode. I haven't racked people up yet. I've had John on here last week. Danielle couldn't make this week. Hopefully next week she'll be feeling well enough and she can at least remote in if not in person. And you can do it remotely. You can be on the show where you are. You don't have to come to Spokane to be on the show. We use something called Jitsi, which is an open source encrypted web conferencing tool. And we have our own HIPAA compliant servers and such, so that when we work with clients in the EU and elsewhere, we've got it all encrypted and we control the servers. So we're not getting the third-party cloud issues and all that complexity. We control the servers ourselves. That's the advantage of my having a tech background, is I'm able to have my own infrastructure, which solves a lot of HIPAA issues. And my information security certification background in doing audits. So that's helped a lot for us to have a very expensive infrastructure inexpensively. But anyway, we use Jitsi. It's JITSI. There is a Android phone app. I don't know if it's available for iPhone or not. Check it out. Let me know. And what you want to do if you use that is, unless you're on Wi-Fi, if you're in video mode, it will consume a lot of your cell phone bandwidth. So use it on Wi-Fi or switch it. There's a button that says audio only mode. But that's how you can join our conversations if you want. You can always just chat real time during the broadcasts, Tuesdays 1 to 2 p.m. Pacific time. YouTube has, when you go there should be a little chat thing that you can chat in. Or you can comment on the recorded videos. Or if you want, you'll be able to join on, we'll use the public ones for now for the show at meet.jit.si/TR Talk Show. So meet.jit.si/TR Talk Show. And I'm not going to put a password on that yet. And only if we get a problem with somebody abusing it and being inappropriate, then I'll have to put a password on it and we'll have to go through more security processes. But in the future, if you want to be able to join the conversation, not even to say as a formal guest, just as an audience member who wants to comment, if you'd rather not type and you'd rather be able to voice and have a conversation through Jitsi, we'll be able to do that. So let me go ahead and, before we wrap up the show here, and before I go off to all the other client stuff and interviews and stuff I have to go do for people, let me go ahead and update this to have that info for the future, because I kind of forgot about it myself. Let's see. So, well, we can just do, okay. You don't really need to type that first part there, but just in case people want to know. And here, talk show. All right, so that is a public. It's still encrypted, but it's public. It's not password protected or anything. So I hope people will not abuse it. I hope everybody that joins and watches this is a commensurate professional, and we won't have any problems. If it becomes a problem, I'll have to lock down access to the channel or use our own servers, and then we'll have to go through an email process to give you that password. I hope it doesn't come to that. We've been able to run the RPG Research public Jitsi for years, and we've never had anybody abuse it, but we'll see what happens. So that is the URL. It's a little clunky. I'll get that added to the website as well, so that in the future you'll be able to jump on there during the live show if you want and comment directly that way. So I look forward to your questions and comments. If you have topics you would like me to bring up on future shows, please post what topics you would like to hear us discuss. I'm willing to cover pretty much, if it has anything to do with TR and RT, or I also bring in neuroscience and research psychology and compassion-focused therapy and nursing and other backgrounds into the conversation. But if it's about TRRT in any aspect, please post what topics you'd like to hear mentioned, discussed more, and let's turn this into an active community. So I hope you found this useful. I will be working also on making these available as podcasts. Just the audio. I have such a busy schedule. I probably don't have time to edit any of these. As much as I'd love to have a better edited video and audio, I'm just going to dump them straight to audio, and we'll start putting them into podcast feeds once we get enough episodes in the queue here. But meanwhile, just go to trtalkshow.com, and I'll have links right after the show. I'll quickly add a link to this particular, all 3 episodes, and you'll be able to go through those. And again, thank you for joining, and happy rec therapy, wherever you may be. Be well.